Next month I'm doing the 80s, but in the 90s there were some comic book stories I want to cover. And we're going to start with The Life and Death of Superman, or should I say, The Death in Return.
And it's Thursday. You know what that means? It's time for us to have another Throwback Thursday. And we're gonna go back in time, throw up that celebration, because Heart of the Stories we tell, and me, Rob the host, is going to take us back to a quick nostalgic look and see how a story was that might be a little bit on the older side. So celebrate your week almost being over as we look at...
This is part one, The Death of Superman. Now, I'm not even going to try to give this a rating, although I probably should. Overall, I love the story so much, I might be biased. I want to give it the mithril rating, the unapproachable. Now, Superman's death isn't exactly an unknown story, and we all know that where this is going with these four coming in. And we also know who did the killing. So there's not a lot for me to spoil in this, but I am going to throw a spoiler warning up in a minute anyway. It wasn't the first time someone killed the Man of Steel. That story has been told and retold many times. But for some reason, this one just hit a zeitgeist within us. And that black bat meant so much to those of us growing up in the 90s. I cried when I read the story. And it wasn't the last time either. In fact, they just killed a Superman not too long ago. I covered that too. But okay. For those of you that don't know what I do here, I review stories as they come up, do throwback Thursdays like this for older ones, and I try to get to the heart by examining how and why we tell stories. If that sounds interesting, click subscribe, because right now we're going to throw back to the 90s when I was wearing a black armband like this to celebrate the life of Superman when they killed him. And we have a lot to go over.
So once again, it's stop. Spoiler time.
As usual, we're going to start with setting. But the setting's a little complex. It's just the DC universe. It is the universe that, since Crisis on Infinite Earth, Superman has been a part of, along with the Justice League and many others. So I guess I'm going to just call a skip on that. And we're going to talk about the characters. We're going to talk about characters like Superman and Lois Lane, who are the primary focus, but we're going to talk about the entire Justice League, practically the whole DC universe. And of course, we're going to talk about Doomsday. But we're going to talk about them in a second. Because the real push here is the plot. It was a linear plot, and I always would have thought that it would have been Lex Luthor. But no, this man, Dan Jurgens, was the one who killed him. He did it by poaching a story idea in the middle of a conference, when they couldn't marry Superman off because the TV show wanted to do it at the same time. He pitched, what if we just kill him? And the story starts with Superman being interviewed by Cat Grant, and the Justice League going out to stop some monster that's tearing apart the countryside. The monster is Doomsday. And Doomsday doesn't have a big backstory. Doomsday isn't very intricate plot-wise. He's just a force of nature. They didn't have his backstory planned out yet. He was just the end of Superman. So the Justice League, at the time consisting of Guy Gardner, Booster Gold, Blue Beetle, Ice, Fire, Bloodwind, and Maxima, land and find this creature tearing apart the countryside. They do everything they can to intervene, and they're just getting their asses handed to them. The end of this issue is amazing, as Booster Gold gets knocked back and is flying until Superman catches him and says, it's okay, I'm here to help. So then Superman lands, and Doomsday hauls off and punches him, and he just stands there and takes it. So Doomsday takes a few seconds to think of that, hauls back, kicks him hard enough to knock him out. Because you see, Doomsday's as strong, if not stronger, than Superman, and that's a reoccurring theme. He takes everything the Justice League has to pour at him, and just keeps going. He literally just knocks each and every member of this team out. A handful of issues, each one showcasing how deadly and powerful he is, until Superman 75. And that's when the fight just gets to Metropolis, and like two weary boxers that have already exchanged one too many blows, they finish it. It is a battle of will and strength, and for those who would call him friend, for those that would call him family, for those who would call him mother, son, or husband, it was the darkest day of all. the day that a Superman died. But that wasn't the end of the story either, because then they did World Without a Superman, the Funeral for a Friend series. Starting in Justice League, they picked up with the idea of how does the world move on when there is no Superman, and it just gets dark and dark from there. This was a well-written story. This was an excellently written story. The point of view mostly follows Superman at the beginning and then Lois and Jimmy at the end. The entire thing, especially the last issue, Superman's death, really is done through a framing. And the theme and symbolism is just perfect because it's the death of hope. It's the death of innocence. It's what happens when your childhood hero passes, and seeing the symbol of the bloody S or the S on the black background just changes how you see the S symbol that always was supposed to stand for hope. So let's talk about the good. Well, I have been talking about the good. This is an amazingly written story that is heartfelt, will make you feel, and will make you remember where you were when you read it. It's groundbreaking, heartbreaking, and timeless. Well, at least I think it was. But it's not perfect. Let's talk about the bad. They did their best to make up for this, but in the aftermath, Doomsday didn't make a lot of sense. And I'll be honest, I don't think creating a new monster was the way to go. If I had been the one writing the death of Superman, I would have done it very differently. And finally, there's the ugly. The ugly is the darkness that flowed out of this story. The Justice League was disbanded and beaten and broken. And yeah, we got other Justice Leagues, and yeah, there were other stories, but I think all of the comic books took a dark turn around this time, and I'm not blaming it on this. This was just one of the stories that did it. But we're going to talk next week about the second half of this, the return of Superman, and this white bag. But I'm curious, did you read it? Did you read it when it first came out, or later? Let me know what you thought of the death of Superman. I still get chills thinking about it. Dan Jurgens really went out of his way to write a masterpiece. And of course, if you like what I'm talking about, hit the like and share button. And of course, if you haven't already, click subscribe. Because we talk about stories here. Comic book stories, movies, novels, you name it. And I'd love to talk with you about them. And maybe next week I can put up some of your reactions to this before we talk about the return. If I get any reactions, that is. For now, I hope you have a good night, and thank you for walking with me through the heart of the death of Superman and all the stories we tell.